In the previous video, I showed you how to create a class and then add a method to it, which is the equivalent of a function. Let's go ahead and move forward and talk about constructors. So the way that we've been creating our objects up to this point is defining the class and then using this statement, let, and then you have a variable name equals new, and then you mention the class that you want to create an object of. And then you set all of the attributes this way, one at a time, by using the dot notation to reference an attribute of the object. But that's not the only way that we could do this. Here, in fact, is a preferred way to do it. We declare the variable that's going to hold our object. We say equals new, and then rather than having empty parentheses, we pass in a set of parameters which we're going to use to populate the attributes of our newly created object. Now, something to consider at this point is the fact that order is going to matter here. A person could put this stuff in any order, and unless you tell your code what to expect, it has no idea how to assign these values to a particular variable as part of your object. Okay. This right here is some more complete code as it relates to using this syntax right here. You have your class, and then you use the word constructor, and you have some parentheses here, and then here are what look like a bunch of variables that get passed in, and then those variables get associated with or assigned to the object attributes in this way. A set of assignments happen right there. And if we wanted to test this, we would, that previous code, we would first create our variable, and then we could do a couple alert statements. Let's go ahead and do this in code. So go over to your editor, and I'm going to call this class my bank account, and I'm going to create a constructor, and I'll say constructor, and I'm going to pass in an account number, an account type, an account balance, and an account status. And then a lot of typing needs to happen here. I'll say this dot I account number equals account number. And I'll say this dot S account type, and I'm thinking like checking or savings, equals account type. This dot, and then what was my third parameter there? Account balance. F account balance equals account balance. And then this dot account status. So maybe we want to indicate that the account is closed or open. All right, let's go ahead and subsequently make use of this. I'll say let O my bank account equals new my bank account. And we'll put in some number for the account number. We'll say this is of type checking. We'll put in some nice account balance, probably your account balance, not mine, and say the account is open. All right, and then let's go ahead and test this. I'll say alert, and we'll access the my account, and we'll say let's check its status, and we're looking for open, and then we'll do another alert, which is going to be we'll look at the account number. Now, previously I had some other alert boxes here on the page, so let's make sure I've commented any of those out. All right, so I'll go ahead and hit save. and it says checking, and it gives a number. So everything worked as I was hoping and as I expected. I printed out those things to the page. Couple things here to note. One thing I did not do here, which I could have done, is I could have done I account number and S account type and F account balance and let's see, account status. That should have been a string. At any rate, it works the same way whether I put this here or not. When I didn't put it there, it just created those attributes as part of the constructor. If I put them here now, then essentially these variables are declared to the computer that you're going to be using them, and they actually get set in this step. So JavaScript's a little bit flexible with when you bring variables into existence. You can state it ahead of time, which I believe is a good practice, so that other programmers can look at your code and say, oh, I see, you're planning on having these 4 attributes here, as opposed to having them just kind of appear out of nowhere at this particular step. Another thing I'd like to discuss and highlight as part of this is that notice that these variables here are different than these variables. They don't have to be. They can be the exact same name, because if you don't precede it with the keyword this, it's considered a completely separate variable. Furthermore, at the time that when you're creating your object for the first time, this variable is only in existence for the time that it takes to run this constructor code. So once this block is over, then this value that got passed in, because it got passed in this position, when that block's over, this variable no longer exists. Let's go ahead and look at that in our debugger to watch that happen. Okay, so I'm going to right click on here and say inspect. I'm going to go over to the console, and then not the console, I'm going to go over to source, click on the source code. Let's make this a little bit bigger here. And I'm going to add a breakpoint right there. All right, so let's go ahead and reload this. And it starts on line 95. And it says, hey, you're about to create an object of this type. Okay, let's go ahead and step through it. So we just jumped into this class, and at this point, as I'm hovering over it, I don't see anything interesting happen. If I mouse over these things, they're all undefined. Let's go ahead and step forward. Okay, now we're executing the constructor. As we're executing the constructor, we can see the variables that are being passed in. These variables are going to be completely wiped out as soon as this block's over and these 4 statements get executed. As I step through, my attributes get assigned from this thing that from this set of variables that are passed to the constructor. So initially they're not holding anything, and then at each line an undefined variable becomes defined. It gets assigned something, and then once this constructor is done, these variables get thrown away, but these variables continue to hold that information that got assigned to them. So I will step, step, and then step, step. Okay, so we're done. This has been created. If I look at it, it's over here on the right hand side. I can see my bank account object and the things that are associated with it. But because this constructor is done now, everything in here is empty and not set to anything anymore. Okay, so from here we can just continue on with our alert boxes as we've seen before. Okay, I'm done talking about constructors. I'd like to just talk about one additional topic at this point in time. And that is the difference between class variables and instance variables. Okay, so remember how I said that we can think of a class as a mold from which we create objects. 99% of the time when you're writing code, that's true. However, there is a different way that we could use a class in software like JavaScript. Sometimes we can treat a class as if it were an already instantiated object. Now, we don't do this all the time, but we can. So I'm calling this a rule that you break in this instance, that usually you're creating an object from a class, but sometimes you can just directly reference the class as if it were an object. Again, this is the exception, not the rule for what you're usually doing. Okay, you've probably seen this in action before. If you've accessed the math class before, doing something like math.round as a function, or math.pi to get 3.14197, then you'll know that without using this particular class and creating an instance of it, you can still get some utility out of it, as if it were an already existing object. So when you have cases like this, where you have some utility function or some utility value, you can set up your object, your class differently. And let me show you what the syntax is for that. All right, so first off, you have to know something about Dragon Ball for this next example. What power level impresses Vegeta when he meets someone like Goku? It's power level 9000. So look at this code right here, class Saiyan person, and then because I want to access this variable or attribute, which is power level, without creating an instance of this, I put the keyword here, static power level 9000, and that allows us to do the same thing that we see right here, like math.pi, except in this case we can do SaiyanPerson.I power level. So this becomes a permanent value that we can always access without creating an instance of the class. Now, if we do create an instance of a class after writing this code, then although what I just showed you works, alert SaiyanPerson.I power level, if we create an instance of it right here, like Vegeta is a new Saiyan person, if we then try to access this attribute right here, we're going to get an error message. Why do we get an error message? It's because when we declare things as a static attribute, you can only access it by using just the formal class name .that. If you try to access it as if it were a property of the instance, it does not work. All right. We're done talking about objects for today. Next, we'll be on to more advanced topics related to objects.